She claimed Kate made her cry, but the palace just released proof it was the other way around. In a jaw-dropping twist, Buckingham Palace has released a sealed internal report packed with never-before-seen text messages and staff testimony, confirming Meghan Markle intentionally lied during that bombshell Oprah interview. The fallout? Devastating. For the first time, we see clear evidence that it was Kate who was emotionally blindsided, not the Duchess of Sussex. Why did Meghan reverse the story? Why did the palace wait until now to strike back? And how did these revelations completely unravel the carefully curated public image Meghan has worked years to build? Stay with us. What you're about to see could be the final nail in her royal coffin. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if everything you believed about the royal rift was a carefully constructed illusion? What if the world had been manipulated, not by Buckingham Palace and its centuries-old traditions, but by the very person who claimed to be its most wounded victim? For years, the world rallied around Meghan Markle. Her tearful recollections in that now infamous Oprah Winfrey interview painted a chilling portrait of a royal family shrouded in secrecy, cruelty, and cold indifference. The most heart-wrenching moment for many came when Meghan, in a poised but broken tone, accused Kate Middleton, the beloved Princess of Wales, of making her cry days before her wedding. That soundbite echoed around the globe, cementing an image: Meghan, the misunderstood American outsider, victimized by a jealous sister-in-law and a cold-hearted royal machine. But as it turns out, there's more to that moment than the world was ever told. Much more. This video uncovers the report that was never meant to go public. A document quietly authorized, meticulously compiled, and guarded in secrecy deep within the corridors of Buckingham Palace. A report now leaked with a single purpose: to dismantle Meghan Markle's credibility once and for all. It includes unseen text messages, private staff testimonies, internal correspondences, and timelines that tell a radically different story than the one Meghan shared on international television. No Netflix filter, no glossy edits, no Hollywood spin. The report suggests that Meghan did not just distort the truth. She may have outright fabricated key moments, strategically weaponizing her victimhood to influence global opinion and shift power away from the crown. Among its most damning revelations, written communications where Meghan appears to plan how she will frame events to her advantage, even rehearsing narratives with aides who later turned whistleblower. And central to all of this is Kate Middleton. For years, she endured the fallout of a public perception war she didn't start. She stayed silent, never issuing a counter-statement, never contradicting Meghan's story, even as her reputation suffered. Now, for the first time, the palace is fighting back, not with emotion, but with evidence. Why now? Why has the royal institution, historically reluctant to respond to tabloid drama, decided to release this bombshell? Sources close to the palace suggest a tipping point has been reached. With Meghan and Harry's influence growing in the United States, their brand turning activism into profit, and their names attached to everything from Netflix docuseries to memoirs attacking the very family they once embraced, Buckingham Palace has made a decisive move. Not a counterattack in words, but a declassification of facts. The objective isn't revenge. It's reclamation. For too long, silence was mistaken for guilt, restraint for cowardice, dignified distance for callousness. This report seeks to flip the narrative to show that, far from being indifferent, the palace acted in the only way it knew how, methodically, discreetly, and now, undeniably. But this isn't just about royal optics. It's about truth, trust, and public accountability. Millions of people around the world altered their view of the royal family based on the Oprah interview. The palace was cast as a relic of colonial cruelty and institutional apathy. Kate was portrayed as petty and mean-spirited. Charles and William were labeled emotionally detached. Meghan emerged as a cultural icon of resistance. And yet, if the report is accurate and the contents verified, then the world was fed a manipulated story. Not an exaggeration, not an innocent misremembering, but a conscious fabrication with global consequences. This introduction serves not only as a gateway into that story, but as a warning. In the world of modern media, truth and image are not always aligned. This is a story where those two things collide in the most public, painful, and permanent way. Before we dive deeper, it's worth reflecting on how we got here. Rewind to 2018. The wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle was supposed to be a fresh chapter for the monarchy, a modernization effort, a symbol of inclusion, and an international love story. For a moment, it was exactly that. Crowds cheered, newspapers celebrated, and even the most traditional royalists embraced this union as a bold new step. But the cracks began forming quickly. Behind palace walls, tensions brewed. Staff began to resign in rapid succession. Reports of internal conflicts, whispered accusations of bullying, and discontent over protocol violations began to bubble up. And at the center of it all, Meghan. She was hailed as revolutionary and resented as rebellious. Her supporters saw her as a breath of fresh air. Her critics saw her as divisive and calculating. Regardless of which side the public leaned toward, the palace said nothing. Then came the Oprah interview in 2021. That interview was Meghan and Harry's full frontal assault. From racist concerns about Archie's skin color to mental health neglect and cold cruelty, the accusations were delivered with surgical precision. And they stuck. No revelation was more viral than the one involving Kate Middleton. Meghan's calm demeanor as she recounted how Kate made her cry, only to later apologize with flowers, seemed reasonable and restrained. But it shattered Kate's pristine image. In a single moment, Meghan became the wrong bride. Kate, the villain. Now, 3 years later, that carefully maintained story appears to be collapsing. And it's not collapsing from anonymous tabloid rumors. It's collapsing under the weight of digital receipts. Texts exchanged between Meghan and senior aides. Messages referencing pre-interview planning. Staff statements saying they were pressured to frame details in a certain light. And timelines that, when laid out side by side, don't align with Meghan's version at all. It's a house of cards, and it's crashing fast. Yet, perhaps the most unsettling part is not what Meghan said, but how many were willing to believe it without question. Influential media outlets, talk show hosts, celebrities, and social activists all echoed her narrative, some even weaponizing it against the monarchy with glee. But what happens when those who scream the loudest in support begin to realize they were misled? This video will take you step by step through the key parts of the leaked report. We'll examine the texts. We'll hear from the insiders. We'll compare the timelines. And we'll unpack the calculated precision with which this entire narrative was built, brick by brick, until it came crashing down under the weight of evidence. This is not about taking sides in a royal feud. This is about transparency in a world where media manipulation can redefine reality overnight. As you watch, ask yourself, who benefits when truth is distorted? How much damage can a single unchallenged narrative do? And can someone rebuild their image once the curtain has been pulled back and the audience realizes they've been watching a performance all along? Because what this report reveals is not just that Meghan lied. It suggests she engineered a narrative for maximum sympathy, maximum damage, and maximum control. This isn't about petty wedding tears anymore. It's about a system of influence, deception, and accountability. And whether the monarchy is ready to fully reassert its authority in a modern world where silence is often misread as guilt. The curtain is lifting. The texts are public. The insiders are talking. And Meghan Markle's version of events may never be viewed the same again. Let's begin. It was a calm Sunday evening on March 7, 2021. Millions of people across the world tuned into what had been billed as the royal interview of the century. Oprah Winfrey sat in a manicured California garden, across from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. The atmosphere seemed serene, the conversation respectful at first. But what unfolded over the next 2 hours would become one of the most controversial moments in modern royal history. No script, no interruptions, and no Buckingham Palace oversight. From the moment Meghan began speaking, there was an electric tension in the air. With poise, clarity, and emotion, she began recounting her experience inside one of the world's most powerful and secretive institutions. But then came the moment that froze the world. Meghan's claim that Kate Middleton had made her cry just days before the royal wedding. She wasn't vague. She didn't hedge. It was presented as a fact. The public's jaws dropped. For years, the British press had reported the opposite. That Meghan had reduced Kate to tears in a dispute over Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress. But now, Meghan was flipping the story. In her version, Kate had wronged her. She did not go into detail, saying she wanted to protect Kate, but the emotional damage had already been inflicted. She had rewired the public narrative in seconds. What was once seen as a story of royal snobbery turned into something more layered, more sinister. The elegant Duchess of Cambridge, long admired for her grace, allegedly brought a biracial bride to tears at the most delicate time in her life. In that single revelation, Meghan positioned herself as the gentle victim of a cold and unwelcoming family. She didn't stop there. Over the course of the interview, Meghan and Harry laid bare accusations that reverberated across continents. They claimed that within the royal family, concerns had been raised about their unborn child's skin color. They revealed that Meghan's pleas for mental health support were ignored, driving her to the brink of suicide. They discussed the breakdown of relationships with Prince Charles and Prince William. And above all, they exposed what they claimed to be a culture of emotional isolation within the royal household. Yet for many viewers, the emotional core of the interview remained the story about Kate. It was personal, unexpected, and deeply human. Unlike the abstract discussions of racism or constitutional structure, this was about two women, both in the global spotlight, colliding behind closed doors. And in this case, Meghan emerged looking like the one who had suffered in silence. The result? A public relations earthquake. In the days that followed, headlines across the globe exploded. Meghan became the face of victimhood and royal bravery. She was praised for her honesty, her composure, and her willingness to speak truth to power. Talk shows hailed her as a modern feminist hero. Celebrities from Beyoncé to Chrissy Teigen to Serena Williams posted messages of support. Oprah's facial expressions and gasps became viral memes. In a media landscape that feeds on perception, Meghan had just won the biggest battle of her life. Meanwhile, the royal family reeled. In London, palace courtiers scrambled to draft a response. Queen Elizabeth's eventual statement, calm, calculated, and carefully worded, acknowledged the gravity of the allegations without confirming or denying any specific claim. It ended with a phrase that would come to symbolize royal restraint in crisis. Recollections may vary. That phrase, while diplomatic on its surface, hinted at something deeper. It was a signal, a polite suggestion that Meghan and Harry's narrative was not as airtight as it appeared. Still, the damage had already been done. The monarchy had been cast, particularly in the eyes of a younger, global audience, as archaic, racially insensitive, and emotionally neglectful. Meghan, on the other hand, had cemented herself as a symbol of courage. She had spoken up when so many said she should have stayed quiet. The Oprah interview was more than a media event. It was a cultural reset. But as the weeks and months passed, the details began to draw closer scrutiny. Some of Meghan's statements didn't align with previously verified facts. For instance, her claim that she and Harry had a private wedding ceremony with the Archbishop of Canterbury 3 days before the actual public event was quietly contradicted by church officials. Then came questions about her passport being confiscated. Officials and experts clarified that Meghan had traveled internationally multiple times during her royal tenure. These inconsistencies sparked quiet murmurs in media circles, though many feared being labeled insensitive or anti-progressive for questioning the Duchess's story. Still, nothing sparked more intrigue than the bridesmaid dress incident. Why was there such a wide gap between what the press had long reported and what Meghan had said? Was this a simple case of differing perceptions, or was there something more deliberate behind her version? The British press began re-examining sources. Royal correspondents reached out to staff who had worked during that time. Slowly, unconfirmed leaks emerged suggesting that several aides recalled Meghan being at the center of the tension, not Kate. That Kate, in fact, had cried during the incident and later attempted to smooth things over by sending flowers and an apology note. These leaks, however, were always unofficial and could be easily dismissed by Meghan supporters as pro-monarchy propaganda. Without concrete evidence, it was a stalemate of narratives. Until now, the newly released palace report doesn't just revive the old rumors. It lays out, in explicit detail, a timeline of communications between Meghan, her team, and various royal staffers in the days leading up to the wedding. The most damning part? Text messages allegedly authored by Meghan herself, in which she expresses frustration about Kate's response and suggests framing the event in a way that favors her. These messages, dated and archived by royal aides, align with the timeline leaked to the press but contradict Meghan's televised version. They don't just suggest exaggeration. They hint at a deliberate recalibration of truth. If true, the implications are seismic. What does it mean if Meghan Markle, in a highly publicized and emotionally charged interview, knowingly misrepresented events for personal gain? What does it say about the media culture that amplified her story without vetting its accuracy? More importantly, what does it reveal about the current landscape of public perception, where narratives can overshadow facts with alarming ease? The Oprah interview was, at its heart, a carefully orchestrated media spectacle. Oprah, an interviewer known for her skill in guiding emotional revelations, gave Meghan and Harry a global platform without any counterbalance. No pushback. No follow-up on inconsistencies. No representation from the palace. Just one side of a very complicated story told with absolute emotional authority. And to many, that's what made it so powerful. But that same lack of scrutiny now serves as a glaring hole. It raises questions not only about Meghan's intentions but also about how the media, the public, and even global institutions responded. Was it all a case of too much sympathy too fast? In this new context, Meghan's story begins to resemble not a cry for help but a masterclass in image manipulation. A calculated narrative that weaponized truth and trauma for maximum effect. And Kate Middleton? She remains silent. Even now, there is no public statement, no interview, no social media response. Only a growing chorus of palace insiders and third-party sources coming forward with a different version of events, one in which Kate was the peacemaker, not the perpetrator. The damage to her image, however, had already been done. Millions viewed her through the lens Meghan had crafted. For some, that perception will never fully reverse. But for others, especially in the wake of this report, there is a new curiosity, a hunger to know the full truth. That curiosity is what this video explores in the chapters ahead. Because this isn't just a royal squabble. It's a global case study in media influence, character assassination, and public redemption. The Oprah interview might have been the bombshell that shook the monarchy, but this palace report? It may be the earthquake that levels the entire narrative. And the aftershocks are only just beginning. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry delivered their explosive interview to Oprah Winfrey, Buckingham Palace didn't immediately hit back. There was no emergency press conference, no aggressive rebuttal, no legal threats. Instead, the institution known for its rigid adherence to protocol and unshakable silence issued a single paragraph of carefully worded text 3 days later. The world was waiting for fireworks. What they received was a measured response that felt anticlimactic to some, but perfectly in line with royal tradition. The final line, however, contained more weight than most realized at the time. Recollections may vary. It was a line laced with royal restraint, but also one that opened a door. Within the palace, that door was already wide open. Even before Meghan's words echoed across televisions around the world, senior royal aides had begun preparing for the worst. They knew what was coming. Whispers of what Meghan and Harry had told Oprah had already reached the highest offices in the royal household. Although the family didn't know every detail, they knew enough to begin assembling a response. Not for public show, but for preservation. While the public and media were gripped by the narrative unfolding on screen, the palace initiated a far more subdued and strategic operation behind the scenes. No cameras, no headlines, just meticulous investigation. The family might have been blindsided emotionally, but institutionally, they had long ago learned to prepare for crises with absolute precision. One of the first steps taken was to pull internal communication logs. Emails, texts, notes, and reports from the time of the royal wedding in 2018 were retrieved. Staff members were quietly interviewed. Some were still under non-disclosure agreements, but others, particularly those who had already left their roles, were more candid. What emerged was a jarring contrast to the tale Meghan told. Palace officials discovered inconsistencies between Meghan's claims and the timeline of events stored in their own records. More than that, they uncovered correspondence where Meghan discussed the fallout of the wedding disagreement with an intensity that raised eyebrows. She was reportedly upset that Kate had not apologized in a way she deemed satisfactory. She expressed frustration that her emotional state had not been prioritized. There was no mention of having been the one brought to tears. There were, however, signs of strategic narrative building. This was no longer a matter of perception. It was now becoming a question of fabrication. The palace began to consult its legal and public relations teams. Their internal debate was ferocious. Should they go public? Should they confront the allegations head-on? Or should they maintain the age-old royal maxim, never complain, and Queen Elizabeth II, known for her unmatched calm under pressure, reportedly advocated for patience. She understood the risks of escalation. The monarchy had weathered storms before: abdications, divorces, death. A media war with her grandson and his wife would be messy and unseemly. She believed time and truth would eventually speak for themselves. But Charles and William were less forgiving. According to senior sources, both men were furious. Charles, still emotionally wounded from Harry's claim that he had cut him off financially and refused his calls, was privately incensed. William, portrayed in the interview as distant and complicit, was deeply hurt. Kate, still reeling from the public blow to her character, said nothing. But those close to her were less restrained. Still, the palace held its public position. Behind the scenes, however, damage control was already underway. The communications office was tasked with preparing dossiers of factual events for internal review. Trusted journalists were selectively briefed with small corrections, not enough to spark scandal, but enough to plant doubt. This was a silent campaign, a slow drip of context into the media bloodstream. They also began identifying key witnesses, staff members present during the incidents Meghan described. These included assistants, private secretaries, dressers, and others who had first-hand knowledge of the lead-up to the wedding and the now infamous bridesmaid dress dispute. These individuals were asked for detailed accounts. Their statements were documented, anonymized, and compared for consistency. What the palace found was chilling. A consistent pattern emerged. Several members of staff remembered Meghan being upset, but not tearful. They remembered Kate apologizing after an emotional disagreement. They also remembered Meghan being insistent that her version of events be honored above others. One aide described a meeting where Meghan allegedly rehearsed how to speak about the incident if ever asked. Another reported that Meghan had once said, "People believe what you tell them first." That phrase stuck with the investigators. The palace didn't take immediate action. It wasn't in their nature. But they began building a case, slowly, methodically, and quietly. A war chest of documentation should the need ever arise. Not because they wanted to launch an attack, but because they wanted to be ready if the time came to defend themselves. One of the turning points came when former royal aides began breaking their silence in private conversations with journalists. The Sunday Times and other major publications began publishing reports that contradicted key elements of Meghan's Oprah interview. Though these reports were careful not to cross legal lines, they carried the weight of insider knowledge. Readers began to ask questions. The mythos of Meghan's absolute victimhood began to show cracks. Still, the palace did not act overly. Why? Because to do so would risk the very integrity of the institution. If the monarchy was seen launching a direct offensive against a pregnant woman living in exile, it would backfire spectacularly. They needed time. They needed public mood to shift. They needed the evidence to be unimpeachable. That shift began in 2022, as inconsistencies in Meghan and Harry's various accounts started to accumulate. In interviews with The Cut, Variety, and in their Netflix docuseries, subtle differences appeared in their storytelling. Dates shifted. Context changed. Descriptions of family interactions became more abstract. Public trust began to erode, and with that, the palace sensed its opportunity. The death of Queen Elizabeth in 2022 altered the landscape completely. With Charles now king, there was a change in tone. He had less sentimental attachment to the Sussexes. William, stepping into his role as Prince of Wales, was even more resolute. The need to protect the institution became paramount. It was no longer just about defending personal reputations. It was about preserving the future of the monarchy. That is when the idea of releasing the report gained traction. According to insiders, the report wasn't written in haste. It had been in development since 2021. It was initially intended as a private archive, a record in case litigation or future scandal required an official account. But as public opinion began to shift and Meghan's brand started to falter, it became clear the time to act had come. Strategically, they decided to leak rather than publish. An anonymous source provided excerpts to a high-ranking royal correspondent. Key pages from the report, including screenshots of text messages, were shared selectively with legal clearances in place. The media response was instantaneous. Headlines declared the existence of a secret palace dossier that could destroy Meghan's credibility. The old narrative, the one set by Oprah, was now being rewritten. But the palace didn't stop there. They coordinated this leak with a flurry of background briefings. Loyal reporters were invited to off-the-record sessions where they were told, in broad strokes, what the report contained. The idea was to get the narrative moving while avoiding direct confrontation. Let the public decide. Let the facts speak louder than any emotional television interview. The effect was profound. Within hours of the leak, public debate reignited. Old supporters of Meghan began to hesitate. Neutral observers began reevaluating. Former staffers who had once been silent felt emboldened to speak, albeit anonymously. A few even hinted at additional damaging material that had not yet been released. Through it all, the palace remained silent publicly. No official statements. No denials. No confirmation. Just a calm, unwavering stillness while the media storm swirled around them. It was a silent war, yes, but it was also a calculated campaign of reclamation. The monarchy, so often painted as outdated and reactive, had adapted. It fought not with swords, but with strategy. Not with rage, but with records. And it did so on its own terms, never letting Meghan control the narrative again without challenge. This chapter of the story is not about explosive confrontation. It's about quiet preparation. It's about a powerful institution, wounded but wise, building its defense brick by brick, preparing for the moment when the truth would finally matter more than the story. And now, that moment has come. For years, the public's understanding of the rift between Meghan Markle and the royal family has been shaped by emotion, innuendo, and carefully edited interviews. But behind the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, far from the cameras and headlines, a different kind of narrative was taking shape. It was not curated for sympathy or dramatic effect. It was built on timelines, documents, and verifiable records. That narrative now exists in a confidential report. Until recently, a private archive meant only for internal use. Now, leaked and exposed, it has become the most explosive development in the royal saga yet. The report is not a tabloid expose. It is a meticulously organized collection of communications, testimonies, and cross-reference data assembled by a small team of senior royal aides and legal advisors. From its structure to its contents, it was constructed not as a PR weapon, but as a defensive measure in the event that the royal family would one day need to present an unfiltered account of what truly happened behind the scenes. To understand the full weight of this document, we must first understand how it came into existence. In the days following the Oprah interview in 2021, the senior leadership of the palace recognized a turning point had arrived. For years, their strategy had been silence. For centuries, discretion had been their strength. But now, with reputations being reshaped in real time by a single narrative crafted and delivered by Meghan and Harry, the palace could no longer rely on dignity alone. The Queen, then still reigning, gave quiet approval for her team to begin assembling what one aide later described as a timeline archive. It was not framed as a report in the beginning, but rather a digital and physical collection of all relevant communications, statements, and staff notes pertaining to Meghan and Harry's tenure as working royals. Emails were pulled. Texts were collected. Handwritten notes were retrieved from desks and stored in a secure digital system managed by a dedicated legal team. Over time, this archive became more than a record. It became a dossier. What makes the report so remarkable is its precision. It is not emotional. It is not filled with speculation or opinion. It is built entirely around data. Every statement is backed by a timestamp. Every quote is attributed to a person, even if that person is listed anonymously for legal reasons. It reads like a forensic breakdown of events, not a scandal sheet. The structure of the report is divided into 5 key sections. The first section is labeled Timeline and covers the period from Meghan and Harry's engagement in late 2017 to their official departure from royal duties in March 2020. Every major event, media statement, public appearance, and internal conflict is laid out in chronological order. The timeline is supported by embedded email threads, meeting summaries, and calendar entries, all designed to establish an objective foundation before diving into specific claims. The second section, labeled Communications, includes the most controversial content. Here, direct messages sent by Meghan to staff members, private notes written during internal meetings, and draft versions of public statements are compiled. This section is where the report's impact becomes undeniable. It contains exchanges between Meghan and her press team where she discusses how to frame specific narratives before media appearances. It includes internal correspondence where staff express concern about being instructed to stick to the story during media inquiries. It also contains a set of texts exchanged between Meghan and her private assistant in the days before the royal wedding, texts that directly address the altercation with Kate Middleton. In one message, Meghan allegedly writes, "Kate is the one who made me upset. But if we say she cried, it'll be worse for her than for me." In another, she appears to anticipate backlash, writing, "The truth doesn't matter if they already believe me." These texts are not paraphrased. They are presented with metadata, dates, times, devices. Some messages are accompanied by screen captures. Others are preserved through logs exported from secure palace communication servers. Their authenticity, according to the report, was verified by 2 separate digital forensic analysts hired under royal legal counsel. The third section of the report is titled Testimonies. This is where the voices of the staff come in. Over a dozen interviews were conducted with individuals who worked closely with Meghan during her time in the palace. These include assistants, schedulers, press officers, and even security personnel. Their testimonies were anonymized but internally verified. Many accounts show a clear pattern of Meghan allegedly trying to reshape minor incidents into emotionally charged narratives and of staff members feeling pressured to comply. One staffer recounts an incident where Meghan allegedly insisted on rehearsing the phrasing of an interview segment related to her relationship with Kate. She kept saying, "If I don't tell it, who will?" But we knew parts weren't exactly how they happened, the staffer states. Another says they were instructed to remove certain words from press statements to make the palace appear more cold and distant. It wasn't technically lying, they add, but it was bending the context to fit a story. The fourth section is labeled Press Impact and tracks how specific narratives introduced by Meghan and Harry affected public perception, both in the United Kingdom and internationally. Charts in this section show a correlation between the Oprah interview and a sharp decline in public favorability ratings for Kate Middleton, Prince Charles, and Prince William. It also includes internal polling conducted by the palace's media office, which found that over 70% of viewers believed Meghan over the palace in the days following the broadcast. This section includes commentary from media experts consulted by the palace, who described the Oprah interview as a masterclass in narrative control. They analyze Meghan's rhetorical tactics, her use of emotional inflection, and her ability to present allegations without requiring proof. It is a clinical breakdown of how an unchallenged story, told with confidence, can override institutional reputation. Finally, the fifth section, labeled Analysis and Conclusions, offers a sobering perspective. Here, palace investigators outline their findings without dramatic language. They stop short of accusing Meghan of intentional deceit, but they use phrases like narrative enhancement, memory manipulation, and constructive perception. They point out discrepancies between Meghan's public statements and the documented facts. They note how her storytelling evolved over time, becoming more emotionally loaded as her brand shifted from royalty to activist. This section includes a confidential note from a senior legal advisor recommending that the palace retain the report for potential future use in defamation defense or as evidence in reputational risk assessment. It also warns that public release could lead to legal retaliation from Meghan and Harry, but suggests that strategic leaking, if carefully managed, could achieve the same public clarification without exposing the crown to litigation. All of this, the texts, the testimonies, the timelines, paint a dramatically different picture from the one shown to the world in Oprah's garden. It does not depict Meghan as a villain, but it does suggest that her portrayal of events was not grounded in objective reality. It frames her as someone acutely aware of the power of narrative and determined to control it. In doing so, it shifts the spotlight from emotional damage to strategic manipulation. The leak of this report did not come by accident. According to trusted sources, the leak was orchestrated with surgical precision. A respected royal correspondent, known for their discretion and loyalty to factual reporting, was approached by an intermediary. They were given access to a redacted version of the report's communication and testimony sections. The conditions were strict: no copies, no photography, only notes. But even that was enough. The journalist's subsequent article, published in a broadsheet rather than a tabloid, exploded across digital platforms. Within hours, it was trending. The story didn't scream. It didn't attack. It simply laid out facts, contradicting Meghan's most pivotal claims. What followed was a shift in tone across the media landscape. Outlets that once treated Meghan as untouchable began to ask questions. Columnists who previously feared backlash began to examine inconsistencies. Social media accounts with millions of followers posted side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's statements versus the documented records in the report. And most importantly, public trust began to shift. No longer was Meghan viewed solely as the wrong Duchess. She was now being examined as a public figure with an agenda, whose version of the truth could not be accepted without scrutiny. As for the palace, they issued no public response. That silence, once interpreted as weakness, now resonated with a different kind of power. It was the silence of a strategy fulfilled. The report had done its work. And yet, questions still remain. Why wasn't this report made public sooner? Why did the palace choose now to let it leak? And more importantly, how will Meghan and Harry respond, knowing that the factual backbone of their most famous interview has now been dismantled, piece by piece? This chapter brings us to the edge of the report's revelations. The next takes us into its core, where we will explore the most critical pieces of evidence, including the text messages that directly contradict Meghan's version of events. Because while the report outlines the truth, it is these messages that scream it. And once the world sees what Meghan wrote, in her own words, the story may never be the same again. It takes only a few words, written at the wrong time, to unravel an entire narrative. In a world where digital communication has become the norm, screenshots are no longer just bits of conversation. They are evidence. They are timestamps of truth, preserved in the cloud, immune to denial. For Meghan Markle, the power of storytelling has always been her most potent weapon. But what happens when her own words, stored in the form of text messages, begin to contradict that story? That question is at the heart of the most damaging portion of the leaked palace report. Of all the information unearthed in the aftermath of the Oprah Winfrey interview, staff testimonies, timelines, public perception analyses, none is more undeniable, more irrefutable, or more difficult to explain away than the collection of digital messages sent from Meghan's personal phone to palace staff in the days leading up to and following her 2018 wedding. Until now, much of the discourse around Meghan and the royal family has revolved around conflicting memories and subjective interpretation. Who remembers what? Who felt hurt? Who cried? These are the kinds of questions that often leave room for debate. But text messages are different. They are not memory. They are moments, frozen in time. They are exact. They are dated. They don't change with retelling. The leaked report contains a subsection titled Internal Digital Correspondence, Duchess of Sussex. Within this portion, a series of messages, originally archived as part of internal palace documentation, lays bare a pattern of narrative preparation, emotional recalibration, and outright contradiction of the version of events Meghan delivered to the world in her Oprah interview. Among the most pivotal of these messages is one sent 3 days before the wedding, during a high-pressure moment when details about the ceremony were still being finalized. The dispute over Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress had reached a head. According to palace staff, both Meghan and Kate were under emotional strain. Tensions were high. In public, Meghan would later claim Kate made her cry. In private, the messages suggest something very different. In one message, timestamped at 9:47 a.m., Meghan writes to her personal assistant, "She's Kate, not wrong, just stubborn. I'm just tired of bending. If I cry today, it won't be because of her. It's because I'm exhausted." This single sentence, though common tone, quietly undoes the central thread of Meghan's Oprah narrative. In the interview, she stated without hesitation that Kate had made her cry. She presented it as a fact, then added that Kate had later apologized and sent flowers. The implication was that Kate had been the aggressor, and Meghan the emotional casualty. Yet in her own words, just days before the wedding, Meghan acknowledged that her emotions were tied to fatigue, not mistreatment. She didn't portray herself as a victim of a cruel duchess. She portrayed herself as a woman under pressure, frustrated but composed. The context matters. Immediately following that message, her assistant replies asking if the issue should be elevated to a senior aide for intervention. Meghan's response is equally telling. "No need. I'll spin it differently if it ever comes up." It's a brief message, but a devastating one. The phrase "spin it differently" implies forethought, intent, and control over the version of events she planned to share. This isn't an emotionally reactive victim. This is a person thinking ahead about public perception. These weren't isolated messages. Several other texts collected in the report reinforce this narrative control. In a conversation the night after the rehearsal dinner, Meghan texts a senior member of her communications team. "If people knew how I've been treated this week, it would shock them. But it's too late to fix anything. The only thing I can control now is the story." The phrase "the story" is repeated several times throughout her internal communications. It's used when referring to interviews, press statements, and even informal conversations with friends who might speak to the media. According to the report, Meghan was acutely aware of her image and took careful steps to ensure her version of events was consistent with the persona she wanted to project. One particularly revealing exchange involves a planning email for an interview Meghan was preparing for months before the Oprah special. In that email, she outlines possible talking points. Under the bullet labeled Wedding Week, she writes, "Mention dress incident, flip if needed depending on tone of interview. Make sure emotion reads as pain, not conflict." This email is not just suggestive. It is instructional. It shows that Meghan was actively scripting her responses to maximize emotional impact. She wasn't merely remembering things as they happened. She was shaping them for an audience. This level of detail extends even to messages about Kate's apology. In the Oprah interview, Meghan mentioned that Kate sent her flowers and a note. She framed this as a gesture of reconciliation, but also as an acknowledgement that Kate had done wrong. The report, however, includes a copy of the note that Meghan allegedly referenced. It was short, courteous, and apologetic in tone, but nowhere in the note did Kate admit to wrongdoing. Instead, she expressed regret that their exchange had caused distress. She wrote that emotions had been high and that she hoped they could move forward with peace and grace. What's more telling are Meghan's messages about that note. To her assistant, Meghan allegedly said, "She's trying to save face, but I'll keep it. Might be useful later." This chilling line reframes the entire interaction. Rather than viewing Kate's gesture as one of genuine remorse or goodwill, Meghan saw it as leverage. Something to be used later. Possibly as evidence. Possibly as a weapon. The palace's legal team, in reviewing these messages, included a section in the report discussing the implications of intent. Their conclusion was not that Meghan lied in a traditional sense. Rather, they suggest she knowingly curated a version of events, carefully omitting or rephrasing key details to portray herself as emotionally wounded by royal coldness, when the full record painted a more complex, less sympathetic picture. It's important to understand the gravity of these revelations. In a world where public opinion often trumps documentation, Meghan's messages stand as a rare moment where truth reasserts itself, not through angry denials or counter-accusations, but through her own digital footprint. The implications ripple far beyond the palace walls. For Kate Middleton, this is a quiet vindication. After years of media scrutiny, subtle humiliation, and global mischaracterization, the truth is finally visible. For the royal institution, it represents a rare but deliberate step into transparency, a calculated decision to correct the record without descending into personal vendettas. And for Meghan, it represents a reputational crisis. Those who defended her most fiercely now face a difficult question. If she was willing to alter the story of something as intimate and specific as the bridesmaid dress incident, what else might have been exaggerated? How many of her public claims, wrapped in the armor of emotion, were curated more for impact than accuracy? For supporters of Meghan, some may argue that emotional truth holds a different weight than factual truth, that her sense of pain is valid, even if the details were skewed. But the palace report challenges that very idea. It raises the uncomfortable reality that manipulation, no matter how emotionally grounded, still distorts the truth. And when those distortions affect real people's reputations, families, and public institutions, accountability becomes necessary. The media has reacted accordingly. Following the leak, several high-profile journalists issued follow-ups to their previous coverage of the Oprah interview. A handful of them, including those who initially praised Meghan without reservation, have publicly admitted that the new evidence alters the way the interview should be viewed. Social media platforms are now filled with side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's words and her texts. What once appeared as emotional honesty now looks like careful theater. And yet, Meghan has remained publicly silent about the messages. Her legal team has neither confirmed nor denied their authenticity, choosing instead to criticize the leak as an invasion of privacy and a strategic attack timed to damage her brand. Behind the scenes, however, sources claim that Meghan and Harry are in crisis mode. Emergency meetings with publicists, calls to friendly media outlets, strategies to redirect the narrative back to issues of racism, mental health, and colonialism. Safe topics that elicit broader sympathy and deflect from personal contradiction. But the texts are stubborn. They don't shift with public mood. They don't soften under pressure. They remain. And in their raw, emotionless clarity, they do what no press statement or PR campaign can undo. They reveal a portrait of a woman who understood her audience better than most. A woman who knew how to generate sympathy, who knew how to take control of a story, and who may have chosen to do so at the expense of the truth. This chapter, more than any other, cuts through the noise. Because while opinions can be argued and narratives debated, the messages Meghan sent in her own words remain unshakable. They represent the final nail in the coffin of a story that, for years, went unchallenged. What began as a media war of perception has now become a reckoning of reality. And as the palace watches from its ancient halls, and the world reevaluates what it once accepted without question, the story of Meghan Markle has entered a new phase, one not of triumph or tragedy, but of truth finally being heard. For years, they were silent, bound by confidentiality, trapped by loyalty, and intimidated by the enormity of the institution they served. The staff who worked closely with Meghan Markle during her time in the royal family kept their stories locked away. These were not palace aristocrats or career courtiers. They were assistants, press secretaries, wardrobe managers, schedulers, and advisors. Many of them young, dedicated, and hopeful when they first joined the Sussex household. But behind closed doors, they witnessed a reality far removed from the public fairy tale. A reality that, until now, only they truly understood. After Meghan and Harry's Oprah interview, the royal household was cast as a cold, archaic machine. Staff were implicitly labeled as complicit in the supposed abuse, enablers of the toxic culture that allegedly drove Meghan to despair. While Meghan detailed her mental health struggles, her mistreatment, and her tearful experiences, staff were left defenseless, voiceless, and villainized. But now, as the palace report circulates through both official and leaked channels, a different set of voices is emerging. Voices from within. And for the first time, those who remained silent are beginning to speak. According to the report, over a dozen former royal staffers either volunteered or were asked to provide testimony during the internal review. While their names are redacted in the final draft, their words are not. Each account is accompanied by verification, dates of employment, role within the household, and corroborative references from fellow team members. The result is a consistent pattern of experience, one that fundamentally contradicts the narrative presented by Meghan. The first notable testimony comes from a former assistant who was present during the planning of the royal wedding. Described in the report as a scheduling and events liaison, this individual coordinated directly with Meghan and Kate on logistics related to the bridal party. In their account, the infamous bridesmaid dress incident is remembered in starkly different terms than those shared by Meghan. According to the aide, Meghan was firm to the point of dismissive in her interactions with Kate. The Duchess of Cambridge was polite but clearly stressed, the aide noted. When a disagreement emerged over one of the dresses, Meghan became insistent that her choice be final. Kate expressed concern, not as a matter of defiance, but because of comfort and fit. The aide further explained that following the disagreement, it was Kate who became emotional and removed herself from the room. She felt she had offended Meghan by raising the concern. She was mortified. This account aligns with multiple others from within the staff. Another witness, a junior press aide at the time, recalled overhearing Meghan say to a senior planner, "She's, Kate, too used to everyone saying yes. That's not how I work." The staffer claimed the remark wasn't overly cruel, but carried an air of contempt. After the incident, Kate reportedly wrote a note and sent flowers. This same press aide confirmed seeing the note's draft before it was sent. It was apologetic, but not confessional. Kate expressed regret about the tension but never admitted to wrongdoing because she didn't feel she had been unkind, just concerned. This is a far cry from the emotional exchange Meghan described during her Oprah interview. Another former staffer, whose role was focused on media relations, offered insights into Meghan's interactions with the press. She was obsessed with headlines, they said. Every morning began with a review of media coverage. If something didn't align with her preferred narrative, we were told to counter it, even if that meant pushing back on stories that were factually correct. The staffer revealed that there were internal tensions between Meghan's personal PR instincts and the traditional media approach of the palace. She wanted more control, more rebuttals, more emotional framing. That clashed with how royal press offices operate: low emotion, high discretion. Another account comes from a member of the HR department who managed interpersonal issues between staff and senior royals. They described an atmosphere of growing tension during Meghan's tenure. "We began receiving quiet complaints from staff about feeling mistreated, not abused in the physical sense, but emotionally and professionally dismissed." This HR official went on to explain that a pattern developed. Staff felt like they were walking on eggshells. Mistakes were magnified. Meghan demanded perfection and often implied that failures were personal betrayals. It created a culture of fear. The report includes specific examples: a young assistant who left her role after suffering what she described as emotional exhaustion, a senior advisor who resigned after a series of heated disagreements over media strategy, and a stylist who requested reassignment citing an inability to manage Meghan's unpredictable expectations. Each of these individuals was offered a non-disclosure agreement upon departure, standard protocol for royal staff, but some now say they felt pressured into silence. One aide remarked, "We signed because we didn't want to be seen as traitors to the crown. But then we watched as the world turned against us, believing Meghan's version without ever hearing ours." These testimonies don't present Meghan as a monster, but they do describe someone different from the public image she's cultivated. Not a helpless victim, but a driven woman determined to control every aspect of her life, including the stories told about her. Several staffers described her as charismatic and passionate, but also calculating, unyielding, and, in some cases, vindictive when challenged. A pivotal moment in the report comes from a group testimony, where 4 former staff members jointly recounted their experiences during the run-up to the Oprah interview. They were not part of the royal communications team at the time, but had remained in contact. Their shared concern was that elements of the interview would misrepresent their time working with Meghan and Harry. According to them, the palace was advised not to respond publicly but to begin compiling a factual counter-record. One of these former employees described watching the Oprah interview and feeling viscerally sick, not because of the accusations alone, but because every emotional beat, every tear, every breathless pause felt rehearsed. "And I knew which parts weren't true." The palace's response was strategic silence. The staff's response, until now, was heartbreak. With the leak of the report, that heartbreak has turned into quiet validation. They did not have the power or influence to rebut Meghan in real time. But now, their experiences are out in the open, stripped of PR spin, anchored in first-hand observation. Their words, spoken without the drama of a televised interview, feel real, grounded, and deeply human. These testimonies also raise an important question about power dynamics. In the public discourse, Meghan was often portrayed as the outsider fighting against a rigid, traditionalist monarchy. But to those who worked closely with her, she was not powerless. She wielded her influence with intensity. She had the loyalty of her husband, the favor of the press in certain circles, and the cultural momentum of being seen as a symbol of progress. Staff, on the other hand, had no voice, no platform, no Oprah. Only silence. Until now. The testimonies don't just discredit parts of Meghan's story. They also humanize the people left behind in her narrative. Young professionals who believed they were part of something historic, who hoped to modernize the monarchy, who admired Meghan in the beginning, but who were quickly disillusioned by the experience of working for someone they now describe as demanding, emotionally manipulative, and at times, vindictive. The palace, for its part, has not officially commented on the staff statements included in the report. They maintain their position of dignity and discretion. But the inclusion of these voices signals something new. A willingness, perhaps, to let the world see the human side of the institution. Flawed, yes, but not the cold machine it's often made out to be. In the end, it is the staff who provide the most compelling insights into the truth. Not because they seek fame or revenge, but because they live the day-to-day reality behind the headlines. Their stories, once suppressed, now fill the silence left by a narrative that no longer holds. The next chapter in this unfolding truth is not about Meghan's interview or even her messages. It's about the other woman at the heart of the story, Kate Middleton, a woman who remained silent through scandal, who endured humiliation without protest, and who now finds her quiet dignity finally aligned with the facts. Because when the staff speak, they don't just challenge Meghan's story. They rewrite it. Throughout the unfolding royal drama, one figure has remained remarkably consistent, conspicuously silent, and intensely scrutinized: Kate Middleton. As the Duchess of Cambridge, and now Princess of Wales, she has never given an interview, never issued a counter-statement, never called a press conference. While her name was dragged into controversy, while her character was dissected and distorted, she stayed out of the media war. She chose restraint over retaliation, composure over confrontation. But in that silence, questions loomed. Was she hiding guilt or carrying a burden she never deserved? Now, in the wake of the leaked palace report and the staff testimonies that have come forward, Kate's silence is being reconsidered in a new light. Not as complicity, but as the grace of a woman who refused to descend into the mud, even as it was slung in her direction. And perhaps more striking than anything else is the discovery that Kate may have been the one telling the truth all along, by saying nothing. When Meghan Markle accused Kate of making her cry, the impact was immediate and deeply personal. The Duchess of Cambridge had spent years cultivating a public image rooted in elegance, poise, and reliability. She wasn't flashy, wasn't controversial. She was the steady hand at Prince William's side, the relatable royal who seemed at once composed and warm. For many, she was the embodiment of what a modern royal could be, dignified but human, regal but not removed. Then, in the space of a few seconds on international television, that image was shattered. In Meghan's version of the story, Kate had caused her to break down during a dispute about bridesmaid dresses. Though she acknowledged that Kate later apologized and sent flowers, Meghan made it clear that she was the one who suffered. "She made me cry," Meghan said. "I steady, tone calm. And it really hurt my feelings." The implication was not just that Kate had a moment of insensitivity, but that she had hidden behind a false narrative for years, allowing the world to believe that Meghan was the aggressor. To many viewers, this was the final straw. Kate, once admired, was now branded as cold and perhaps even cruel. And yet, she said nothing. As the palace scrambled behind the scenes, Kate remained publicly composed. She continued to appear at engagements, smile for cameras, and carry out her duties with the same quiet efficiency she had always displayed. There were no rebuttals, no pointed messages on social media, no leaks from her inner circle. She simply kept moving forward, letting the storm rage around her. Why? That question has been at the center of speculation ever since. Some interpreted her silence as guilt. Others saw it as royal discipline. But now, with the release of the internal messages and the testimonies from staff, it appears Kate's silence was rooted in something far more rare: integrity. According to multiple sources cited in the report, Kate was deeply hurt by Meghan's portrayal of the events leading up to the wedding. Staff reported that she had made every effort to resolve the conflict privately and with grace. She apologized immediately after their disagreement. She sent a handwritten note. She even sent a peace offering of flowers. Not because she felt she had been cruel, but because she was sorry the situation had become tense. The note, now part of the leaked documents, is short and sincere. Kate expresses regret that Meghan felt hurt, reiterates her support for the wedding plans, and closes with a wish for harmony between them. There is no confession, no groveling, no grand display. It is the kind of note one writes when trying to ease awkward tension, not when trying to cover up wrongdoing. More telling are the staff accounts of Kate's demeanor after the Oprah interview aired. According to one longtime courtier, she was devastated. Not angry, not vengeful, just deeply, painfully hurt. She couldn't understand why someone would twist something so ordinary into something so cruel. Kate reportedly wept in private, but insisted to her staff and advisors that she would not speak publicly. When advisors asked whether a correction should be issued, she declined. "I won't win by defending myself," she allegedly said. "People will believe what they want to believe. I'd rather protect my family than argue with strangers." This insight reveals much about Kate's character. It shows a woman who understood the destructive power of the media and chose not to feed it. A woman who prioritized her role as a mother and future queen over her personal reputation. A woman who endured humiliation without compromising her values. And it is precisely that silent strength that is now earning her renewed respect. In the wake of the report, public opinion toward Kate has begun to shift. Polls conducted by media outlets in the UK and the US show an uptick in support for the Princess of Wales. Comments on social media that once echoed Meghan's narrative are now filled with reconsideration. Readers ask whether Kate was unfairly maligned. Analysts call her handling of the controversy a masterclass in quiet leadership. Her allies have remained equally restrained. No friends or former staff have come forward to publicly defend her in sensational terms. Instead, the palace has allowed the evidence to speak. The notes, the messages.